Well, I'll go ahead and get us started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Friday morning for our sector check-in call. We're glad to come together with so many others from the human service sector to talk about topics that are important to us in one way or another. Appreciate that 8:30 on a Friday when the sun is shining, that you are all spending some time together with us. Although the sun is a little deceiving. I think it's only like 57 out this morning, so it's beautiful. The little chill to the air feels like fall. Also, any of you that have children that went back to school or have youth programming may empathize. I have we're a week and a half into school, and I have a child sick at home with a fever because that's what happens when we all join our germs back together again. So I hope that you are all working through that transition, whether you have children at home or have youth programming or just are, a neighbor or an aunt or a grandma to a young person. This is a busy and sometimes chaotic time of year with big transitions with school. So I hope everyone is managing through that well. This morning, we are excited to have a conversation around environmental justice and environmental equity and what that means for the human service sector and how that impacts people who are being served by people in the human service community. So I'm going to turn it over to Isaac. Isaac joined us on our last call, but I also just want to reintroduce. So Isaac is our new Director of Organizational Development. And in the past, sometimes we've called that agency services, we've called it sector support, but it's really his role is to work with our community partners in ways to provide support to the sector. And so I'm excited to have you all meet him in the coming days and weeks. But Isaac, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our guests.
Thank you so much, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Isaac. I'm the Organizational Development Director, and I'm so excited to have the privilege of introducing our speakers today for the conversation. Before we get started, I would love to just talk about the structure of the call. So briefly, I will introduce our speakers, give them an opportunity to share about their work and how it relates to environmental justice and equity. We have a few questions prepared for them, and then we would love to open the floor up to you all to ask any questions that you may have. One thing to mention, as we work to make these conversations as valuable as possible to you all, we plan on saving the last 5-ish minutes of our call to surface topics for future conversations. So we would love to know what ideas you're thinking about, what expertise you would benefit from hearing from, et cetera. So if you have to leave our conversation early today or feel compelled to do so earlier, please reach out to me before the end with your thoughts. Any and all ideas are welcome as we work to make these as beneficial as possible for you all. So without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce our guests today. Dr. Gabriel Filippelli is a Chancellor's Professor of Earth Sciences and Executive Director of the Indiana University Environmental Resilience Institute. He is a biogeochemist with broad training in climate change, exposure science, and environmental health. He's personally directed over $9 million of research focusing on biogeochemical cycling in the environment and the connections between geochemistry and the geologic record of climate change. He's published broadly, including in publications in Science, Nature, and Geology, and is the editor-in-chief for the journal GeoHealth, published by the American Geophysical Union. He's a fellow, of the International Association of Geochemistry, a 2022 Fulbright Distinguished Chair, and former National Academy of Sciences Jefferson Science Fellow, where he served as a senior science advisor for the U.S. Department of State. So very excited to have you with us this morning, Dr. Filippelli. We also have the privilege of having Paula Brooks join us. Paula is the Environmental Justice Director of the Hoosier Environmental Council. She leads their Indianapolis Environmental Justice Initiative, which aims to identify, prioritize, and ultimately mitigate environmental health risks in low-income communities and in communities of color in Indianapolis. Paula has longstanding interests in human rights and equitable development. An Environmental Leadership Program Senior Fellow. She also serves as the chair of the Indianapolis NAACP's chapter's Environmental Committee. She's received numerous awards for her work in environmental justice and was named a 2021 Hoosier Resilience Hero by Indiana University's Environmental Resilience Institute. And we are so fortunate to have you both join us today. Please, everyone, give a warm welcome to our guests in the chat. And we would love to give you both an opportunity to introduce yourselves far better than I can and explain a little bit about your work and how it relates to environmental justice and equity.
You can go ahead, Gabe.
All right, Paula. We were joking before the call, but it's always a good week when I get to see Paula 2 days in a row, as is the case this time. Yeah, she's a real champion for the environment, hence the award that she got from the Environmental Resilience Institute recently. I wanted to just discuss explain a little bit what we do at the Environmental Resilience Institute, and then explain two aspects of environmental justice that we've been looking at quite thoroughly over the last decade or so. And one's one that is a lingering problem, yet it hasn't gone away, and one that is going to be an emergent problem. So the lingering problem being lead exposure, disproportionate lead exposure in many communities around the country and here in Indiana and in Indianapolis. And the other one is a climate justice issue with heat islands, urban heat islands. But first, I'd like to just introduce the Institute. We formed in 2017 in response to the climate crisis. And a lot of our work spans the gamut of examining fish and wildlife to examining environmental justice. And the goal there is not necessarily just to do the science on these things, but it's to develop just, equitable, and sustainable approaches for communities and nonprofits and NGOs to grapple with some of the challenges they face. It's gotten, especially on the climate front, as you can imagine, it's gotten a big boost with recent legislation, federal legislation, including the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is helping us deal with the lead crisis on the one side, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really just a climate change bill, which is helping us deal with the climate justice aspect. So briefly, and because I want to have plenty of time for discussion, the lead exposure remains a consistent and troubling issue around the world, but even right here in Indiana, where communities are overly burdened with high amounts of lead in their environment. And the lead sources are very clear. We've known this for the last century or so, particularly in the 1900s. We used lead in paint and in gasoline and in pipes. And all of that lead was distributed around the environment, particularly the older urban environment. And we stopped using it about 40, 50 years ago, but it didn't go away, unfortunately. It's still all there. It's in the lead of our structures, of our homes. It's in the soil, and it's in the dust. And now it's also in our kids. And so if you look at a map of a lead poisoning in a city like Indianapolis, you'll see troubling and persistent patterns of high amounts of lead exposure and poisoning in the near west, near north, near east, and near south neighborhoods, older neighborhoods, which have a higher percentage of low-income communities of color in them. And so it's a true environmental justice issue. And it's one that's had been largely forgotten about until the Flint water crisis came about. And unfortunately, it's also a very preventable issue, but very little money has gone towards solving the problem. So we've been working directly with communities and directly with community-based organizations like Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, the Indianapolis Public Schools, the Indianapolis Marion County Public Libraries, to increase capacity to test the distribution of this lead in the environment. Because these kids are getting lead from somewhere, right? They're getting lead from their very local environment. And if we can find the hotspots, and if we could provide solutions for those families to reduce or even eliminate those hotspots, we will save countless IQ points. Just in a nutshell, lead is a neurotoxin, and so it impacts a child's IQ permanently and leads to a significant increase in ADHD and risky behavior. That's not consistent among all kids. I'm not saying that if you have elevated blood lead levels as a child, you are doomed for a terrible future. That's not true. But it is a challenge. It is a challenging future for some kids. So we're trying to get upstream of the problem. And this is where the health services, I think you could help me think through this. When I work with public health people, they're dealing with a child who's already been lead exposed, right? They come in with a elevated blood lead test, and then you try to sort where the heck is this lead coming from, and then you try to mitigate it. But the point is that the patterns, the spatial patterns of lead exposure are so persistent over the decades that I want to get to the upstream. I want to deal with the environmental side first, while you're also treating the child. And this is going to get a lot more attention as Indiana has adopted a universal testing standard for 1-year-old and 2-year-olds. So every child will be tested for lead. And what that's going to do is a huge benefit for public health. But we're going to see a lot more lead poisoning kids. And so that's also a huge challenge on your side. So that's the lead piece. And I want to pivot over to the heat, extreme heat piece next. We know that cities are hotter than their surroundings. They're about 8 or 9 degrees hotter than their surroundings. And as climate change continues to increase the temperature of the world, really, but of Indiana, that disparity is going to increase so that cities are going to become even warmer than their local environment. The impact of warm cities is simply a significant amount of heat stress for people who live in them, particularly the vulnerable communities, those who are elderly, the young, and those without adequate access to cooling, so electricity and so forth. And there's many ways to rebuild cities so they're not so hot. But what we're focusing on our work is how can we do like very fine scale measurement of temperatures on the ground, make a map of those, and similarly develop a map of environmental justice and environmental vulnerability and intersect the two so that we can find out those areas that are really hot. And if they're really hot and they're in an industrial area or near office buildings, that doesn't matter so much because people don't live there 24/7, right? But if they're really hot and they're also where the communities have maybe lower income, so lower access to cooling, they might have pre-existing conditions, that becomes what we call a heat vulnerability, another type of environmental justice issue. And there's ways that we can provide services to those communities. So we're trying to right size that map and really figure out heat vulnerability. We've already piloted this in Richmond, Indiana, and Clarksville, and we just submitted a letter of interest to NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, to become a national center for this kind of approach. So these are two areas, and just to make it clear, heat kills more people than flooding. It kills more people than hurricanes. It kills more people than fires. It kills more people than tornadoes. It kills more people than all of those put together. So we sometimes don't think about heat, but it's a really intense killer of people, and it's not equitable at all. And so these are two flavors of what we do at the Environmental Resilience Institute, and happy to chat through it after we get to hear Paula. So Paula, I'm going to just turn it straight over to you.
Thank you, Gabe. And I would like to share that Hoosier Environmental Council has worked closely with Gabe in the trying to bring attention to the lead issue. And there's currently a awareness campaign that's being supported and financed by the state on trying to motivate people to get children tested in daycares and primary schools. So I just want to reiterate what Gabe has said in terms of in your roles, this is something that your agencies can support. And I would also like to share that I attended United Way supported activities when I was growing up, and I can remember the sign, give to United Way. But I know that those activities and experiences that I had growing up, it really added to my education and also just to pursue my pursuit of justice as an adult. So I just wanted to share that. As Isaac said in his introduction, I manage an environmental justice project for Hoosier Environmental Council. And if you're not aware or familiar with us, we're an environmental advocacy nonprofit. We are celebrating our 40 years of service this year. We operate statewide. I like to say that we're lean and mean. We have about 14 people on staff. And our mission is really just to help make Indiana a healthier and better place to live and do business. It's a very simple mission, but my work, I advocate for the environment and that definition of environment. And we could talk about this a little later in the questions, but the environmental justice movement was born out of the civil rights movement. And it transformed the environmental movement to include the definition of environment is where you are. So your environment could be your neighborhood, it could be a suburban neighborhood, urban neighborhood. It's not limited to what we typically think of when we think of environment or environmentalism, where we're going out to save the whales or deal with the polar ice melting. Environmental justice says that everyone, it's a human right to live in a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And I thought it was kind of interesting, the recent decision in Montana where the kids actually won the acknowledgement that there is a right for youth to inherit an earth that is clean and healthy and safe. And this is really a basic tenet of environmental justice. And that's what I advocate for in my work. I try to educate citizens and decision makers and lawmakers on environmental justice issues. And the most important aspect of my work, in my opinion, is that I support residents. I work very closely with residents to build their capacity for them to voice their concerns themselves. My background, just to share, is that I'm a third generation resident of Indiana Avenue area. And so I've had the same lived experiences as a lot of the people that I've served. Interestingly, I had gotten bused in junior high school to West Indianapolis, and recently I was able to help them push back on a third sewer or wastewater treatment facility. And it was just kind of interesting because when you think of West Indianapolis, you would not necessarily think of that as a community that is the environmental justice community. But I think my experience of going to school out there, it made me realize that we all have a duty to support each other in this fight. So my work really is dependent on building trust, power, and equity. And when I refer to equity, I actually mean allotment of services, of resources, not so much equity that sometimes I find that term is just kind of thrown out, equity without really thinking about what the meaning is. So I usually try to substitute equity with justice, because we all can understand what justice is. Equity, it has been introduced into this political discourse, and I think that it's negative, because at the end of the day, again, we're all as a human right, we have the right to live in a clean, healthy, and safe environment. In terms of justice, I try to emphasize that to move things forward. And fortunately, in this time in my life, I can push the needle more than someone who is just starting out in their career. But in terms of advocating for justice, I try to make sure that everyone comes to the table genuinely. That is the most important thing. We will never agree. There's a power dynamic that's happening. And as we know, when you have power, you definitely don't want to give it up. So I'm cognizant of all of this in my work. And I just try to make sure that the residents that I support, that the decision makers that I interact with understand their value, their agency, and respect for what they bring to the table. That's really the goal in my work. I find it interesting as well, working at this intersection of government, nonprofit, and community-based organizations, which are mainly informal organizations, and the people. I believe that there could be a reset in not only the power dynamic, but in terms of the communication. And that's what I'm striving for today. So thank you.
Well, thank you both, Gabe and Paula, for your incredible work that you're doing every day, and two, for giving us a bit more of an understanding this morning. Paula, you really teed us off for our first question. And so you mentioned, just how interconnected and systemic these issues are, and how it is, imperative that we engage various types of entities and organizations. So for both of you, I would love to know, how can local governments, businesses, academia, and community organizations best collaborate to create these comprehensive and sustainable solutions for environmental justice?
I'll let Paula take that one first.
I actually believe that all parties need to get to know each other, come to the table, to mingle, become friendly, maybe not friends, but there needs to be a genuine relationship that's there. And I understand that, people come and go in their jobs. So it's not necessarily based on a person, but it's based on organizations, as well as the residents usually remain stable. So it's really about just coming together. And once you, there's a fear, I feel sometimes, that if you get too close to the people that you serve, you lose your sense of distance. But I also think that it's important, especially when you're dealing with people in the community, that they need to see your heart. You just have to go in genuine. And I find that a lot of times stakeholder organizations, we all have a mission, but tend to come in and bring their project and say, oh, isn't this wonderful? Don't you love this project? It's going to really help you. And the residents are like, yes, but that, because they don't trust you, it's in and out. And you wonder why your project failed or you're not meeting your targets. It's really because the people that you're serving understand that your heart is not in your mission. So that's been my experience, Isaac.
Oh, Paula, that is so true. I mean, I kind of harken back to, I was a Peace Corps volunteer when I was a wee lad, and and as an American going overseas to another country, it's easy to get impatient at the lack of speed of projects and so forth until you actually settle down and start understanding that that people need to develop that trust. Organizations need to develop that trust among each other. As Paula said, each partner comes with they have different remits, right? They have different their jobs to do and different metrics to count. But there's almost always, if you give enough time for conversations, almost always overlaps in the middle. And I think of one organization that I've been involved with for a long time called Reconnecting to Our Waterways. It's an initiative here in Indianapolis, and it's what's called a collective impact initiative. So nobody gets really paid. The row, we call it row, has some backbone money to support some staff, but it's really an opportunity to table on issues, right? So you're bringing in people. These people have been consistently showing up every other week or every month for about 6 years, and it's different sectors. And I think, Isaac, the challenge is that we all live in our own silos, right? And we all want to, as Paula says, we want to get our thing done. But you have to respect that we can collectively get a lot more done than we can individually, right? And so a great example is that Reconnecting to Our Waterways had people from the environmental sectors, from the university, from the Citizens Water, from the city of Indianapolis. We had community development organizations all tabling together, and several issues have come up that would have had a profound impact on communities. And because of the power of this collective, the direction of those projects or programs were steered in a way that actually was much more sustainable, much healthier for the community, and much more positive. So yeah, people get impatient. They want to think, oh, here's my thing, you do this. But the community doesn't necessarily want to do this. They want to do the other thing. Well, sometimes there's a gap in the middle of like, oh, okay, I can see how we can get both things partly done.
Yeah, I love the mention of the importance of putting the stakeholder voice forward, front and center. You mentioned, you alluded to this and mentioned briefly, but I would love to know how, from your perspective, community-based organizations can most effectively engage with and mobilize residents to start to identify and recognize and also address these environmental health risks in our neighborhoods.
Well, I have one suggestion. But I know capacity will not allow for this for a lot of organizations, but get involved on a granular level with the community. And what I mean is the neighborhood associations actually go to their meetings, support their programs, maybe give them $5 as a donation at an event, but consistently show up, because once you do that, you're building the relationship. And what I found is that in a lot of neighborhoods, in center, well, not necessarily in Center Township, but a lot of these neighborhoods, you have the neighborhood associations, and then you have a Congress. And stakeholder organizations tend to want to work with the Congress because it's easier, and you usually have another stakeholder organization that's managing that Congress. But what happens is that the residents, each community has a few very engaged residents, and they show up to everything. But as you start to drill down, you find out that you're missing this entire population of this community, because these people do not attend these meetings. They don't belong to these organizations, but they know somebody who participates in the neighborhood association, and there's a grapevine. So if an organization is doing wonderful work on a neighborhood level, and the neighborhood association knows, the community will know. So that's my suggestion, is to really try to drill down on that. And Anne Marie, I'm getting ready to call you out because I see you on here, but I can say INRC does a great job with that. Sharon Logan, who is a program manager, she has really impressed me in how she's been able to develop relationships with the community members on that level.
Yeah, I like that reminder, Paula, that the person who always shows up or is loudest does not necessarily represent all of the community, and it's easy to assume they do, or it's a lot easier, right? Because they're always showing up, but it takes a little bit of extra work. And Isaac, I found that one of the ways that we miss often as organizations, and maybe this will resonate with many of you, is that we want to further our goals, we want to partner with a community-based organization. And sometimes we think of partnering as getting a letter of support for a grant and then getting the money and doing the work. But partnering means talking to them before you even begin conceiving of the project, right? Co-develop this project and make sure that when you get that grant, if you do, that money also goes to the community-based organization, right? So I've been ensuring that everything we do is not just, oh, here's IU getting this big grant and thanks for the letter of support, groundwork, Andy. No, give them a third of the money to do their good work, because that's what they need. And a lot of organizations represented here, I think, will, you have resources, and I think it's important to rethink sometimes the way that you invest those resources to build communities, because a lot of these community-based organizations are just as strapped as any one of us, and a true partnership means I love what Paula said about equity, allotment of services and resources. We have to be thinking about that too to build equity.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned we have a lot of different partners with a lot of different missions on the call, and some maybe more or less directly related to environmental justice. But Paula, as you mentioned earlier, your environment is where you are. And so these issues really impact all of us. And so I would love to know what advice you would give to individuals and organizations who are looking to either start or enhance their involvement in environmental justice initiatives, particularly when engaging with communities that have been historically marginalized.
Well, as I briefly mentioned, environmental justice, its framework covers every aspect of life. So we're talking about transportation, food, air quality, water quality, global health, which is pandemics. We're talking about your built infrastructure, transportation. All of these sectors are part of environmental justice framework. Whatever fits your fancy in terms of the sector that you may be interested in, I would advise that you support the people that you're serving. You talk to them and you find out what their priorities are, because again, one of the tenets of environmental justice is realization or actualization, meaning that the person who has that lived experience has brings value to your planning or your projects, and you really need to center these people in your planning. Just one last thing that I find as a city, what we're lacking recently, in the past 4 or 5 years, we've really focused on racial equity, but we're leaving our disabled community behind. When we're doing our planning, we're not thinking about people who have mobility issues or people who have developmental issues, and how we can structure our programs to support them across the board. So we're not just an agency that's dedicated with a mission to support these people, but in all of our programming, we support these people. And as Gabe said, it's a rising tide. And I think that that's what we need to focus on, and that is environmental justice.
Even would you care to add to that at all? About how we can start to enhance the involvement in environmental justice initiatives?
Well, I think that Paula said it wonderfully. I think that there's the issue is often caught up in this, like, with this stupid conflation of equity and equality, right? We all know they're not the same thing. And I deal with a lot of communities that were formerly red line communities. And because of that, they have a significantly higher amount of gray infrastructure. So streets, freeways, rail lines, factories, and so forth in them. That practice of redlining has been gone for about 40 years or so. But if you look at a map of Indianapolis, it's still all out there. So what that means to me is that you have to start actively tipping the scales toward these communities that have had historical. You don't just give everyone the same, right? You have to tip the scales. You have to allot resources in a way that takes into account for the fact that how few resources these communities were allotted historically for a very long time, because they have a lot to build, right? They have a lot to get there. And a super positive aspect, though, about this federal administration is, right, Paula, so many of the initiatives, so much of the grant funding that's coming along is about environmental justice. So frankly, if you don't have environmental justice, you're actually ineligible for a lot of these federal calls. It has to be a core component, and they're not looking for a greenwash environmental justice, like, oh, I'll use the words in my proposal, and maybe that's good enough. They want genuine interaction, genuine engagement has been my experience.
Yes, community engagement and genuine community engagement is a mandate if you're receiving any federal funding from IRA or the bill. And also there's what it's called a whole of government approach. So it's just not one agency, it's throughout the federal government. All agencies have to incorporate environmental justice in their operations, which is a huge leap for justice.
Absolutely. Yeah, fantastic to see the energy behind that from a federal level. Well, I have plenty of questions, but I know our participants in the call do as well. So at this point, I'd love to open it up. If any participants have any questions, feel free to either come off mute and ask your question live in the call, or I can read your question from the chat. Would love to hear from you all.
And Isaac, can I throw out something first to ponder while we get the questions?
Please.
It'll be very quick. We've done an analysis of the amount of money that different states have received from this Inflation Reduction Act. So a lot of this is on climate justice, climate equity. Indiana has received only 10% of the money that Kentucky has received, only 10% that Michigan and Illinois. We're not trying to get that money. It's free federal money that's ours. We should be getting it. This fire hose of money for climate mitigation, adaptation, and climate justice. And it's like going to every state but Indiana, right? And that's because we're not applying for it. And so if that's something I would also urge you to do, and you can reach out to us at the Environmental Resilience Institute, where we have a matrix of the different grant opportunities that are out there. Because, gosh, I hate being 10 times worse than Kentucky, for goodness sakes, on environmental justice and climate.
And not only climate, also infrastructure. Yeah. And even education. There's monies available to build capacity, organizational capacity. Prior, it's difficult to get that kind of money, but it's available now. And just to add to what Gabe said, the state claims that it doesn't have the capacity to manage this funding that's coming in. So I don't know what to do with that. I would like to just mention that the Indiana Finance Authority is releasing $5 million to fund the replacement of lead water service lines in Martindale, Brightwood, and the near northwest areas. And that's a huge win. And it's kudos actually to Bob Lugar, who is the son of Richard Lugar, and he's one of the assistant administrators. But this was his baby, and he pushed the Finance Authority to actually apply for this money to replace these lines. So the homeowners in these neighborhoods will not incur any costs at all to replace these lead service water lines.
Yeah, thanks so much for pointing us towards this this federal funding that's available. I mean, shocking to hear how underutilized it is in our state. Any participants in the call have any questions for our panelists? Feel free to either come off mute or put it in the chat. We'd love to hear from you.
Can I pose a question then? Anne Marie, I'm getting ready to put you on the spot again, but I've been really impressed with, again, how you all are managing the, that I guess it's American Rescue funding in terms of funding neighborhood projects. Can you just share what you've done? It's been great because it's been such a wide range of projects and programs, and the residents that I work with are overjoyed to just have that opportunity. And also the building of the capacity that you're doing in terms of the uwci program as well. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm looking at you.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you for all you do. So yeah, actually we are about midway through our 3-year neighborhood grants program with the ARPA funds. Neighborhood-based organizations can apply for up to $10,000 for projects identified by neighbors for whatever efforts, beautification, cleanup, placemaking. And so we'll have our next round in October, and I can put some information in the chat about that. And then we actually are about to launch our next round of ICBI, our Indianapolis Community Building Institute, and that's supporting neighbors that want to connect, enhance their leadership skills, and gain their leadership skills to get more advanced, get more engaged with their community. So we actually have 6 neighborhoods that are participating in this upcoming round. Last year, as you probably know, I think we had 4 communities, all from within Martindale Brightwood, that went through the program. And it's over the course of a couple of months, we bring together 3 to 5 neighbors from 4 to 6 neighborhoods. And they go through as a cohort, and when they complete, they can apply for a small project grant, again, to implement, plan a neighborhood-based project, something that they have identified as their own priorities, and working in partnership with existing stakeholders, investors, just to, continue to build momentum and support that grassroots leadership, because that's what's key to sustaining all of our investments.
Yes.
I see there was a question in the chat about sharing more about how we can learn about the federal funding. Gabe, I see you put a couple responses, but I don't know if you wanted to speak on that a little bit more.
Well, both of these, you can, Bill Brown is our main contact who keeps these resources and up-to-date tables on federal funding opportunities. So many of these opportunities, they're community-based organizations are eligible, and other types of organizations are eligible. They're different from normal federal ones where maybe it's just universities. Well, in this case, universities can't even apply as a main submitter of these things. So I put in the chat just an example of one of the resources we have as a way to see how we try to place. It's like it's a matchmaking service. Basically, we got funding from the Energy Foundation to work with communities, and these are rural communities. In this case, it's specifically one track of this federal funding. Work with rural communities to apply for federal funding under this Inflation Reduction Act, because a lot of these small communities don't have the capacity to do grant writing or to deal with grant budgets afterwards, and a lot of these federal grants are quite arduous to apply for. But we provide a grant writer for them, and we've already had. It's only been around since April or May. We've already had one community already submit a grant proposal for them, and we have 7 more who are developing proposals. But Bill Brown at ERI is the person to contact. He knows it all.
Do any other participants have any questions? If not, I could keep our panelists here all day with mine.
I would just like to share that there's several planning initiatives around climate and transportation that's going on, and it would be great as service providers, right? So you actually may see a bigger picture than an individual does, that you participate in these, and it's just maybe going to a meeting or filling out a survey. But one is the Propels initiative that is NDOT, and NDOT is not necessarily an organization that is in the 21st century in terms of how they interact with communities. But because of the mandate coming from the federal government, they have to do this in engagement, enhanced engagement. So it's actually going on right now, and they're looking at transportation needs around Marion County. So it's, downtown in terms of the interstate with the North Split, that's done. But now we have all these other spokes, east and west and north and south, that will get redone or restructured in the next 10 years. And they're asking for input. And I know one of the biggest challenges is for pedestrians to actually be able to walk on streets where you have interstate access or exits. And that could also impact some of your people that you service. So, getting involved with that, the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which has responsibility for planning for the entire region, is they're undertaking a transportation survey as well, but they're also going to be doing a climate resiliency plan. And I think that this is something that you all could really get involved with, and it goes back to the work that the ERI is doing on heat islands. I know, the city is redoing all these roads, but they're using asphalt. Asphalt is hot. It's hotter. Just if the decision makers hear from enough people to say, oh, well, we don't want this asphalt because it's going to end up impacting the heat or the comfort of the people that I service, we can make a change with that. So it's just important as organizations to be a voice for the people that you serve.
Absolutely. That's such a perfect segue to my last question, is how can community-based organizations effectively bridge this gap between the incredible research that's done and the lived experiences of folks in the marginalized communities to address these environmental disparities?
That's definitely a Paula question. She's right on ground zero on that one.
Well, I actually think that as Gabe said, that once you start really truly conversing with the people that you serve, you find out you have more in common than you don't. So it's really, it just really goes back to respecting the agency of the people that you serve. And we know, a lot of people who come to social service organizations, especially currently, are in dire need, be it food, housing. Housing is huge. We have an issue with gun violence in this city. But if you listen and just build a bridge with the people that you serve, you'll be able to find solutions. Instead of top down, it's really bottom up. And it's hard. Sometimes it's just hard to keep that in mind, because we all want to be able to go back to our board of directors and say, oh, this is successful, or write that grant application and say, quantitatively, we served all of these people and it was wonderful. But I just think that the most important thing is to serve the people in a manner that respects their agency.
Indeed. Yeah, don't assume that you are providing them agency. They have agency themselves. It's just not always, they don't always have a channel to exert it. And one of the things I found is also be open to the fact that you don't know all the answers. And often if you're working with local organizations or people, they'll have a better solution than you do. Believe it or not, if you take the time to do that. I've had a couple aspects of our environmental lead testing that I've completely redone because we spent the time and got there and respected the community enough to learn, like, oh, they're doing it. This approach is so much better than mine. So that's the thing, is just believe and trust that innovation can come from not just from the brilliant minds of universities, but from the brilliant minds of the community members themselves.
Because I just want to add to, I had this experience recently that someone who has a year's worth experience was kind of miffed because I compared that to 40 years of work experience with someone else that oh, you're not on their level. And I kind of realized, oh, okay, well, you just graduated from school and you have all this book knowledge, and we've all been there. But that book knowledge will only take you so far. At life experience and a lived experience is everything. I had to backtrack and try to smooth that over a little bit. But I think, as Gabe said, we forget that a lived experience is a lived experience. And when we look at research and people who have credentials, a lot of times it's pie in the sky and it's not really relevant to everyday living experience. And I think we have to always take that into consideration.
Thank you both, Gabe and Paula. Such a powerful way to close off our conversation. Before we all properly thank you both, would love to give you each an opportunity to share how we can best engage and support your work, if you have any suggestions on that.
I would say please reach out to me. I put my email in the chat. I'm particularly keen on ways to expand our environmental lead testing programs in many different organizations and through many different groups. it's lead is an avoidable problem, but we're just not doing necessarily enough to avoid it. And so organizations like yours, I know a lot of you guys touch on that lead issue, but I think there's just so much capacity to do good work here. So please reach out to me.
And I put our website in the chat, but you made me think about something, Gabe. Gentrification is happening in Center Township. So a lot of these historic neighborhoods that were traditionally low income and Black are now high income and mainly white. But that doesn't mean that lead issue has gone away. And we had done some engagement several years ago in here in Morton about the lead issue, and the residents were really surprised that they had a lead problem. But yes, you have a lead problem. And so where I'm going with this is that I don't know where all of you all live, but I would encourage you to reach out to Gabe, because they have a test kit that you could test your own soils in your property. And who knows, you just may have a lead issue. So it's not just in low income neighborhoods. It's a Center Township issue.
Well, please, everyone, join me in thanking Gabe and Paula profusely for being with us this morning. Such a privilege to benefit from your expertise, and what a great way to kick off our Friday. So thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us as well. And for those who are able to stick around, we would love to hear what topics and ideas you are thinking about and would benefit from in these calls moving forward. So please put those in the chat as well, or reach out to me. But once again, a huge thank you to Gabe and Paula.
Thanks a lot. Everybody have a great day.
Yes, thank you all.
Bye.